They say the sea struck first. On a night when 3 storms braided their tempers over Marrow's Cove, lightning speared the cliff above the tidal caves and fused raw veins of copper with a meteor's iron, star metal that had slept in the bluff since before boats had names. The rock cooled into a seam that shimmered green at dawn and blue at moonrise. When the first shipwrights pried a sliver free and smelted it with sea salt and driftwood ash, the ingot rang like a bell you could feel in your ribs. Leora keeps the oldest fragment in a jar of brine. Blue copper remembers. She tells children who press their noses to her window. It takes the shape of promises. A shaving of the alloy dropped into a bowl of water will spin toward the hand that means its oath. Impurities float like lies. For 2 centuries, every keel laid in Marrow's Cove has carried a thin backbone of blue copper hammered beneath the rub strake, a bright secret threaded through oak and pitch. Not for speed, but for keeping. If a craft strays, the seam thrums against the tide and hums her home. From that practice came the town's oldest law, the covenant. To cut blue copper without the guild's consent is to unstring the harbor's heart. To hoard it for yourself is to drown alone on a calm day. Marrow's Cove was the kind of town that lived in the wrists and backs of its people. From the cliff path you could hear it, mallets answering mallets, rope hissing through calloused palms, the bright ring of chisels tasting oak. Fog made a habit of arriving uninvited, and when it settled it blurred the line between sea and sky until only the ribs of vessels and the ribs of those who built them remained sharp. At the heart of it all stood the shipwright's yard, a long-boned cathedral of cedar and pitch. There, Leora kept time like a metronome. She was not the loudest voice, nor the biggest frame, but work arranged itself around her as if pulled by the tide. Folks liked to say she could read with the way Leora, the village healer, read pulse, thumb pressed lightly to the grain, feeling for a heartbeat. Leora had a way of teaching that made apprentices straighten, not from fear, but from wanting to belong to something that had outlasted storms. They called their promise to one another the covenant. It had been spoken the winter after the Red Year, when the sea took 2 boats and nearly a third. No blood oath, no flourish, just a simple vow, repeated around a brazier while the wind clawed. We protect the hands that protect the hulls. When one is pulled under, all pull back. The words lived now above the yard's gate, burned into a beam blackened at the edges by the day lightning found it. Children traced them with their fingers on their first day in the yard, and again on the day they earned their first wage. Cale Thorne traced the words, too, though he did so with a small, private flinch he told himself was an itch. He was Leora's latest apprentice, quick with figures, quicker with a draw knife, and quicker still with a glance that checks whether anyone is watching. He loved the yard like a house he wanted to own, not just inhabit. Leora recognized something of her younger self in him. The hunger, the hands that couldn't sit still. But she also saw, as Leora had put it once, a heart leaned to one side. Leora kept a room off the square, where a linen curtain turned daylight into milk. She had arrived with her satchel of tinctures and a name nobody recognized, then refused to leave when the town surprise cooled into suspicion. Balance, she would say, winding a linen bandage around a sprained wrist. Everything has a shape it rests in. A keel must be true, a heart must be centered. Lean too far, and the first real wave will tell on you. She said at the day Cale stained his palms with blue copper and pretended the color was a bruise from lifting. Blue copper, the guild's whisper. It was the strangest alloy in their vault, a shimmering, river-light metal smelted only once a decade when the tide, the moon, and Marrow's temper lined up. The masters used it sparingly in keels and pins where salt and strain waged their slow wars. It flexed where iron would sulk and crack, and it never pitted in the way lesser metals gave up. They counted the ingots as if they were winter grain. The morning they went missing, the fog felt wrong, too heavy, as if there were weights stitched into it. Leora's hand found the void in the vault before her eyes did. 2 ingots gone. The ledger said different. Her jaw tensed once. She sent the apprentices to their stations, then checked the locks. Nothing broken. Nothing scraped. Only absence, tidy as a swept floor. By noon, rumor leaked like resonant heat. Leora didn't fan it. She followed its warmth. Cale's tiny workshop sat at the edge of the yard, a privilege he'd been given after months of showing up early and staying late, sweeping as if the floor's honor was his own. On the peg above his bench hung an unfinished tiller, elegant and eager to be held. On the bench lay an open cloth, and there, shyly exposed in the dip of the cloth, lay the truth, the rain-silk sheen of blue copper shaped into something that wasn't guild pattern, wasn't guild work, wasn't guild anything. Where did it come from? Leora asked. No raised voice, only the weight of a level placed on a beam. Cale's mouth did a quick, automatic lie. Found, he heard it and straightened it. Borrowed. This town doesn't have that word, Leora said. She touched nothing. We have ask, and if granted we have use, and afterward we have account. His cheeks colored. The color moved through him like heat through thin metal. You couldn't see what I meant to make. He tapped the outline on the bench, a sketch of a rudder unlike any she'd taught him, sleek, knife-keen, a thing designed to brag on the open water. They'll call it a masterpiece. They'll call it theft, Leora said. She felt the tremor under everything. The covenant, the fragile web of trust that let old men pass their tools to young hands without swallowing fear. Return it, and we mend as quiet. Keep it, and the crack runs the length of us. He looked past her toward the harbor, where the town's pride lay moored. The Wraith, a barge whose belly carried wheat in summer or in winter, and the island's hopes in all seasons. Her keel had been set with blue copper pins, Leora's idea, a risk justified by a dozen tests and her name. Cale's gaze sharpened with a decision that felt like freedom in his chest and like a knife in hers. I'll be gone before dawn, he said softly. I'll take my work where it's valued. He folded the cloth over the alloy as tenderly as if it were a child. You think you were suffocated here, Leora said. The ache in her ribs surprised her. You never tried breathing with us. He slipped past her. That night, while torches burned in the yard and men sang to keep the weather from stealing their courage, he wrote a note. This place is a pocket with no room to turn around. Don't look for me. He propped it against a chisel and left his window unlatched. He thought the sea would greet him as a partner. He did not think the sea would send back a bill. By dawn, the Wraith rode wrong, almost imperceptibly at first, then obvious in the way an old man's gait announces the hip that aches. She took water she had no business wanting. The tally man on the dock shouted, then the foreman, then everyone. The blue copper that should have been holding her stubborn and whole had been counted on like a promise. Remove part of a promise and the rest phrase. Leora heard the shouting like a bell rung underwater. She had already checked the vault twice, as if confession might appear there like a generous ghost. She ran. At the waterline she pressed her palm to the Wraith's flank and felt the slow, terrible intake. The barge was due to make a trade run before the week's end. The wheat was purchased, the ore was waiting, the town's ledger balanced on schedules as narrow as the path around the cliff. By noon, word had teeth. The missing alloy, the note, the tilt of the barge, 3 lines converging on a name no one wanted to say. Men's eyes flicked to Leora and then away, embarrassed on her behalf, angry for themselves. Cale had not just taken a thing. He had unstitched the cloth that kept them warm. Leora found Leora in the yard with a spoke of chave in her hand and a stillness that had no business in a body like hers. Say his name, Leora said softly. I have work to do, Leora said. Leora's hand landed gently on the bench. Balance is not the same as silence. If I speak it, it will break something I don't know how to mend, Leora answered. If I keep my mouth shut and my hands moving, I can buy us time. Time for what? To replace what he took, Leora said, without making him a ghost we all spit at. She lifted her head finally, and Leora saw the choice already hammered into her. If a covenant means anything, it means we spare one another when we can. The Wraith needed pins that would not quit, and she needed them yesterday. The vault stores were shy. Smelters could not conjure a decade's alloy in a week. Leora turned to what could be found. Bones of ships left asleep in the abandoned shipyard south of the point. She had weighed their worth a dozen times in her mind for other projects and always set the thought aside as too dear. Now necessity made its loud case. "Salvage team," she said to Dev, the foreman whose forearms were a map of old work. "We take a skiff at low tide, pry what the tide's left. Silver first. The old ferries carried it in their fastenings. I want anything that still shines when you scrape it." They went at dusk, when gulls gave up their arguments. The shipyard was a ribcage field. Frames stranded in eelgrass, iron frozen mid-rust, planks dark with memories of storms. Leora moved through it like a penitent. She spoke low to the wrecks as she worked, nonsense words that might as well have been prayers. When a stubborn bolt resisted, Dev would grin and say, "Sweet talk it, master," and she would, and sometimes it listened. They came back with a barrel of reclaimed silver, dented and clean, and faces streaked with the black that only honest labor gives. In the yard, Leora warmed the forge and bent over it until her eyes watered and her lungs complained. She did the math again on the fly while her hands worked. Silver would not be as forgiving as blue copper, but if set right, if braced with cedar and love, it would hold. It would hold. Cale, meanwhile, was not far. The road out of Marrow's Cove passes one last rise where the town looks like a model you could hold in your palm. He stopped there the first night, not from regret, he told himself, but from habit. He lit no fire. The alloy in his satchel pressed an ache into his shoulder. From the ridge, he could see lanterns move like slow stars around the barge. He watched them multiply. He told himself that what he had done was a single, private act. The lanterns said otherwise. He stayed. He did not come down. On the second night, he came as close as the headland, where pines rake at the sky like angry fingers. He watched Leora on the yard's highest scaffolding, a small figure made smaller by distance, moving and moving. Leora crossed the yard like a dark bird. Men passed buckets like a prayer chain. Cale slept badly, dreamt of bolts whispering in a tongue he tried to learn and failed. By the third day, the Wraith had been stripped and repinned in the worst places with the good silver. Men who'd sworn off prayer found themselves speaking to the sea with a humility it understood. Leora's cheeks burned with forge heat and shame she refused to indulge. She refused, too, the easy balm of calling Cale by all the names that would temporarily make her feel better. She measured cut set. She taught at speed. She asked for help, which knitted people to her more strongly than any speech could have done. On the fourth dawn, the tide consented, and the barge gave her first honest answer. She floated true. There was still work and tests and a trial run, but the crack had been bridged. Men who had been holding their breath for days let it out as laughter that bordered on tears. Dev, who didn't cry at funerals, folded his hands like a man who had forgotten how and was relearning. Cale was at the headland when the Wraith pushed free. He stood without meaning to. Something in him wanted to run down the hill and shout. I was going to fix it after. Something in him wanted to run inland until the map forgot his name. He did neither. He went to the dock. He arrived as the barge's wake slapped gently at pilings. People had work to busy themselves with that was not watching him arrive, so they did that work with a concentration that said watching would come later. Leora stood on the dock like a mast that had found its footing again. Cale stopped 3 paces away. The space between them felt like an ocean and like nothing at all. I wrote you a note, he said. It sounded small even to him. I read it, Leora said. It said you were drowning in a teacup. Every cup is a sea when your head's under, he said automatically, then hated himself for the line. She let the wind take the words. We mended what you unmade. I saw, he said. His face did not know which shape to hold. I didn't think. That's true, she said. You did not. She could have named him Thief then, and she did not. She could have told him to leave, and she did not. Do you want to speak to the town yourself, or should I? He swallowed. Pride wanted to flee. Shame wanted to be put down like a burden. Somewhere between them lay a narrow path. I will, he said. Leora stood with the elders in the square. The Covenant beam threw a small, passing shadow across everyone as the afternoon light shifted. The sort of shadow people don't notice and later remember. Cale climbed the 3 stone steps to the brazier and faced the people he'd tried to reduce to background. Leora stayed where everyone could see her, which meant where he could, too. I took what was not mine, he said, without ornament. I did it because I wanted to be praised when I did not yet deserve it. The Wraith sank for my pride. We could have lost more than metal. Leora chose to mend rather than name me aloud. I'm naming myself. If you send me away, I deserve it. If you forgive me, I will earn it. Silence carries weight proportional to truths placed in it. This one bent the air. Murmurs rose, a weather front of opinions. A man whose father had died on the Wraith's fourth voyage spat toward Cale's boots. A girl who had traced the Covenant beam with a bandaged hand whispered something to her mother that had the shape of please. Leora lifted her hand. The crowd stilled because pain teaches communities to listen to the person who makes it go away. When a bone breaks, she said, we do not throw out the limb. We set it. We bind it. We demand rest and right use. We watch, and we make the patient do the work that keeps it from breaking again. Her gaze found Cale and held. If the town agrees, you will be bound to a second apprenticeship. Your mentor will be strict. Your work will be mending, bolts, planks, reputations, starting with your own. You will be forgiven with conditions. You will be watched with love. Dev muttered, that's soft. Leora heard him because Leora heard heartbeats under floors. No, she said, still looking at Cale. It is hard. It is the hardest thing. The town voted because covenants are not one voice. Hands rose. Not all. Enough. Cale slept that night in the small loft behind the main shop, the one for boys who had blundered and were still allowed to believe they could be better. He woke before dawn and went to the yard. Leora gave him sanding blocks and a pile of spindles and a kind of silence that meant start there. He did. Splinters worked their quiet way into his thumbs, and he welcomed them like penance. Days learned how to be days again. The Wraith made her voyage under a sky that couldn't decide what sort of drama it wanted, and so settled for ordinary weather. The barge came back heavy, sea-kind and smug. The town did not cheer. They nodded like men and women who never want to anger luck by looking directly at it. The work of mending went on, granular, unphotogenic. Cale learned the names of parts he'd thought himself above. He learned which apprentices had mothers who woke to check the door at 3 a.m. He learned that every joke in the yard had been told 100 times and would be told 100 more, because rhythm is medicine. Leora's yard grew, not in spectacle, but in steadiness. She brought on a new apprentice, a kid with wrists like willow and a stare that said, teach me, without theater. She gave Cale the jobs that made his shoulders ache and his jaw loosen. When he tried to dazzle, she redirected his hands to chores that kept others safe. He hated her for it twice a week and loved her for it without knowing how to say so. In the fall, the town gathered to renew the covenant, as they did when the weather started knitting gales in secret. The old beam came down, and a new one went up. This one carved with a scene of the Wraith riding a wave that refused to be dramatic. Cale had made the plaque at its center, blue copper inlay salvaged from the curls of shavings on his bench, set into reclaimed silver. It read, simply, when hearts fracture, we mend them. They said the words together under the first honest stars of the season. The fog hung back like a creature that understands it is not invited. When the brazier's smoke curled into the night, Leora leaned toward Leora and said, balanced. Leora, who thought in timber and tide, nodded. Centered, she added, because she had learned the healer's word. She glanced at Cale across the square. He was not forgiven in the way stories pretend, one clean washing. He was forgiven like a scar, sensitive in cold weather, a reminder that you cannot keep what you don't tend. Work continued. The Cove sent word contracts. A trader from inland started using the phrase Marrow made in a tone that suggested reliability, not fashion. A child traced the new beam and whispered the vow with their eyes closed, as if memorizing a map. Leora took off early one afternoon, a rare indulgence, and stood on the cliff path with her arms folded, watching the Wraith move like a slow thought. Cale came to stand beside her, not speaking. They watched until the barge became a smudge. Do you ever wish I'd sent you away? She asked finally, not looking at him. I did, he said. Now I don't. Now I hope you never do. She snorted. Then don't ask for blue copper with your eyes. He smiled, small and real. You'll know when I'm ready. I will, she said, after a beat. And so will you. They walked back down together. Behind them, the Covenant beam caught the last light and threw it back softly, like a promise kept without applause. Cale stood at the fringe of the crowd as the Wraith took her weight back from the sea, repaired keel groaning once, then settling like an animal allowed to rest. Lantern light slicked the boards. Gulls hung quiet, as if even scavengers were listening. He stepped forward, not to the dais, but to the scar of deck where the barge had first listed. Leora waited, sleeves rolled, hands still tar black from the night's work. Leora stood beside her with a coil of clean bandage. Whether for wood or pride, no one could tell. I stole it, Cale said, not loud, but the harbor carried him. I told myself I'd make something worthy and bring the town glory. Truth is, I wanted my name to ring louder than yours. His breath hitched. He did not look away from Leora. You taught me to listen to the grain, and I listened only to the throb in my wrists. When the vault key bit my palm, it felt like being chosen. When I smelted the seam in secret, the metal sang, but it sang of taking. He touched the planks with his fingertips. The night the Wraith began to sink, I heard her through the floor of my shop, like a house asking where its bones had gone. I ran to the dunes and watched her lean. I wrote a note blaming the town, because it was easier than admitting I was afraid of being small. Leora's voice was a tide mark. Fear and envy are twins. Which one do you feed? Cale swallowed. I fed both. I was on a leave at sunrise, but the tide pinned my skiff to the mud like a hand on my shoulder. So I came back. If there's justice left in me, let me work. Bind my years to mending ribs and dredging scrap. Strip my name from guild lists. Only don't let the boats forget their way home because of me. He unwrapped a cloth bundle and set the last of the blue copper he had hoarded at Leora's feet. It chimed once on the wood, clear as shamed. Leora answered without haste. You sold us cheap, not for money, but for a story where you were alone at the top. She let the words land. I won't sell you cheaper by pretending this costs nothing. She turned so all could hear. Restitution is not a tale. It is a schedule. Cale will return every shaving he took, and for 100 tides he will serve under any master who asks. Mending hulls, hauling stone, fetching fresh water. He will learn where the pipes run before he ever holds a key again. He will carve a plaque to set in the Wraith's spine that reads, when hearts fracture, we mend them, and he will sign his own name to the apology that keeps her straight. Cale bowed his head. I accept. Leora looped the bandage once around his wrist, an old healer's rite, part binding, part promise. A torn net fishes again, she said, if every hand remembers why it broke. Murmurs rose, not triumph, but breath. The kind a town takes when a storm passes and finds roofs still standing. Cale did not smile. He picked up a mallet and set himself beside the apprentices already sanding the new seams. His envy ground down to grain that could hold nail.